Hello, this is Luther to talk about Stereotype Threat, an overview for computing faculty. Let me briefly just introduce what I'm not talking about as well as what I am. We're going to talk about stereotypes, but just one very particular narrow subset of stereotypes. Stereotypes generally are when you collect a large variety of ideas about a people into a single entity, so that when you see a person with one particular characteristic, your mind assumes additional characteristics. And this can cause a variety of problems. Some of these are manifest in the minds of others: bigotry, implicit bias, pigeonhole bias, and so on. Some are manifest in the minds of the student: imposter syndrome, stereotype threat, and so on. And in this talk, we're going to focus almost entirely on stereotype threat. Stereotype threat can be defined as the following: when you are aware of a negative stereotype about people like you, then you perform less well, whether you believe the stereotype or not. Okay, so we just have three requirements. You have to be aware of a negative stereotype about people like you, and it impedes your performance. It threatens you. To understand why this might happen, let's briefly talk about the brain. The brain does a variety of automated processing in the subconscious thought before the conscious thought is enabled. For example, when we look at something, a signal about what photons hit the retina of our eye gets transferred to the optic center of the brain, which then sort of emits into other parts of the brain, regions of color, and then inside your brain you have a variety of these sort of automated subprocessors, these little event handlers, if you will, in your brain, that will turn one signal into another signal. So it might take a particular region of color and interpret it as a circle, it might take a particular circle and interpret it as some extra information. And these get quite complicated. So when you look at something, your brain will automatically provide to your conscious thought some information about what you're looking at. So, for example, here, where I have sketched a simple mock-up of a fish, even though it looks virtually nothing like a real fish, your brain automatically produces the concept fish for you and feeds that into your conscious thought so strongly that you probably cannot look at this without seeing a fish. So this is good. This is what we want our brain to do. It learns, it automates things so that we can spend less time focused on activities and more time trusting our brain to supply us high-level information. And as an educator, our goal can be thought to be to create these schemata, to create these automated subprocessors in our brain that will help us understand the world. Our conscious thought is somewhat limited. It can really only hold, depending on how you count, 3 ideas. Some people say as high as 7, some people say as low as 2, depends on what you define an idea to be. But it's a small number of things your brain can hold in it at a time. And in general, when we're teaching our students, we expect them to use most of that to understand what we are teaching, to be consciously engaged in the material and internalizing it, interpreting it, understanding it. And a portion of that we expect to be learning. Learning is the process of creating or refining those schemata to automate this kind of process in the future, so that it will not require as much conscious thought. So we have this small amount of memory. Now, let's come back to stereotype threat. When I am aware of a stereotype threat, it can block some of that ability to learn by taking up some of my conscious memory. So if I believe a stereotype, which remember was not essential, but if I do, then we can argue that what's happening in the brain, we know that we have less working memory available, and arguably what's happening is that we're afraid that we'll fail because the stereotype is right. We're aware of a negative stereotype about us, we believe the stereotype, and therefore we assume we're disadvantaged, and this causes worry, this causes stress, this causes us to think about our likelihood of failure, and that occupies working memory and becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we don't believe the stereotype, we still have stereotype threat. And the postulated reason for this is there's this fear of confirmation, right? I am afraid that if I fail, other people will see this as confirmation of the stereotype, which I believe is false. And this puts additional stress on me not to fail, or not to be seen to fail, which can cause me to obsess about the need to perform well, about others' opinions about me, and again, remove some of that working memory that would otherwise be necessary for me in order for me to successfully engage in the activity at hand. This concept of stereotype threat has been verified in multiple papers. One of the earliest ones, here by Stone et al. In 1999, studied putt-putt, mini golf. And what they did is they took black and white participants, and they capitalized on stereotypes about intellectuality versus athleticism of black and white individuals. They told some participants that the course that they were going on was a measure of natural ability, and others there was a measure of their sports intelligence. And they saw a dramatic difference in the white and black performance based purely on how they told them the course was characterized. This tells us that awareness of a stereotype does impact performance. This a threat was more clearly displayed several years later by Good, Aronson, and Harder in 2007 in this paper where they looked at a math test. You have a math test to calculus students in high school, a fairly difficult math test with 6 questions, and they measured how many they got right. And they measured them both in a non-stereotype threatened environment where they just sort of gave the test to the students. And they found the males and females in the class performed equally, which is what we expect. They were in an advanced math class. They had been sort of only reached there if they were able to perform equivalently under normal circumstances. However, they also took a group of students and intervened to remove stereotype threat by various ways that we'll talk about here in a moment. And then they saw that the female performance greatly increased because the females are operating under a stereotype threatened environment normally. And when that stereotype threat was removed, they were able to perform much, much more effectively. So, to summarize, stereotype threat is caused when you are aware of a negative stereotype about you. Those are the only 3 things that are required. Awareness, a negative stereotype about you. Belief is not required. Both belief and disbelief have different mechanisms, perhaps, for stereotype threat interrupting your ability to perform, but they both cause it nonetheless to happen. And therefore, changing awareness can change performance. Right? If we change how aware somebody is of a stereotype or how much they're thinking about it, they can change their ability to perform. And this has been shown in a variety of studies that have verified that stereotype threat is indeed a characteristic. And note that this can either remove demographic impact in a case where there was not selection bias, where all students are selected randomly from the population, or can appear to invert that impact if there was selection bias, such as we saw in the math test, where there was a selection bias going in. We had people performing at equal ability with stereotype threat, and therefore we saw an inversion of the expected stereotype when we were able to remove that stereotype. And that is a summary of what stereotype threat is.